I want to keep serving this region in Congress. I want to continue to fight for folks here. I grew up here. This is where my folks raised all of us on the east side of rural Clark County. We went up fishing at Battleground Lake on opening day and swimming in the Lewis River. I showed my horse at the Clark County Fair, and I played basketball for Prairie High School's women's basketball team. I want to fight to make sure this continues to be the best place in the country to get a job or raise a family like I'm now doing with my 2 children, or retire. Now, this has been a lot of work to get our economy turned around. I'm so pleased that my laser-like focus is finally paying off. When I started office in 2011, Cowlitz County, Clark County, we were up 13% unemployed, higher than that, almost 19% in some regions. Today, we're at 4.5% and 5.5% unemployment. Real wage growth has happened almost 3% in the last year for middle-income workers. That's tremendous success. And what does this difference look like? Well, in 2011, when I had my first jobs fair, I don't have to tell anybody here how desperate the financial situation was. I will never forget folks who had full resumes, who were standing in line, trying to get a job, any job, to keep a roof over their heads and to pay for food and for transportation costs. In fact, we stopped counting at about 1,600 people who attended that first jobs fair. Fast forward to today. I had my 8th annual jobs fair in the spring, and I pulled up alongside this gentleman and I asked, "What brings you here? What kind of job are you looking for?" And he said to me, "I actually already have a job. I'm just looking to see what else is out there, what other opportunities there might be." That was music to my ears. Now, this kind of economic growth did not come easy at all. In fact, I'm going to fight to make sure we sustain the greatest jobs market we've seen in a decade. This is one of the reasons I have been Washington's leading advocate to stand up to Oregon and their scheme to put tolls on the I-5 and the 205 bridges. This is absolutely ridiculous. They're trying to treat us like their piggy bank. And make no mistake, the tolls that they're going to charge higher on working folks who have to show up to work at 8 a.m. they're not going to use to widen the bridge or make their commute easier. No, their plan is to spend that money elsewhere in the state on pet projects. This is why I'm advancing legislation that's going to stop their unfair tolling scheme. And this issue hasn't even made it onto my opponent's website. This is central to us here. Another issue that's important to folks in this region are protecting Medicare and Social Security. Now, these are vital trust funds that folks have paid their entire working life into, and the government needs to keep its promise. They need to be healthy and strong and available when seniors need them. I strongly believe, this is kind of, all right, so in addition to protecting Social Security and Medicare, I've found in my nearly 8 years in Congress that it is absolutely crucial, if you want to achieve measurable results, that you put policy issues above partisan fighting. Recently, Georgetown University just ranked all members of Congress on their ability and willingness to work across party lines. Out of all 435 of us, they ranked me at number 15 because of my willingness to do it. And it's not just a talking point. I've actually spent my time in Congress demonstrating it. Now, my opponent talks a lot about civility at her campaign rallies, but then she very quickly escalates to blaming Republicans for everything under the sun and slinging mud at the president. Now, I didn't vote for President Obama, and I disagreed with him on a whole host of policy issues. But make no mistake, I chose to put policy above partisan fighting, and because of that, he signed into law my bill to protect over 100,000 forest products and worker and manufacturing jobs here in our region. And you know how we did it? As soon as I heard that some Seattle environmentalists were pushing a rule through his administration to regulate out of place at almost virtually every forest road, I got to work. I reached not just across the aisle, but across the river to Democrat Kurt Schrader, and together we gathered labor, we gathered manufacturers, we gathered foresters, and Republicans and Democrats, and we put together a bill that we sent to President Obama, and he signed that into law, protecting those 100,000 jobs. He wouldn't have done this if I'd spent my time in office slinging mud his direction. You know, I've also done that same thing with regard to sea lions. I don't care if you're from this side of the river or the other side of the river, those sea lions they're threatening endangered salmon runs that are iconic to our way of life here. Kurt and I again rolled up our sleeves, and we got every member of the Washington and Oregon delegation in the House to vote yes on our legislation. Do you know how hard it is to get the Seattle downtown representative to vote on the same bill, a yes, with the conservative Eastern Washington representative? I do. It takes a whole lot of work, but it was worth it. I also joined with a colleague of mine, she's a Democrat from down in California, Lucille Roybal-Allard, to create the Maternity Care Caucus. You know, as a young Hispanic woman in my party, I felt like it was important to rise to the top issues that infect half of all Americans, because you either are a mom or you've got a mom. And I don't know if you knew this, but maternal mortality is on the rise in the United States. Our rates are even worse than countries like Iran. That's absolutely unacceptable in 21st century America, so I got to work. And in this caucus, we've done a whole lot of good work, whether it's getting folic acid into corn masa to decrease birth defects in Latina families, whether it's making sure that TSA can't dump the breast milk out for traveling moms, whether it's making sure that there are safe medications available for nursing and pregnant mothers. We've taken a lot of steps in this area. I have a maternal mortality bill that we hope is going to be signed into law this year that will create committees in every state to arrest this terrible trend and make it safer to give birth here in the United States. That's not the only area where I'm working in a bipartisan fashion, but I will tell you that this race is shaping up into a real contrast. You know, when I supported the tax cuts bill this year, we launched into effect the greatest jobs market we've seen in a generation. 4 million Americans and counting are getting raises, bonuses, and better benefits. That's music to my ears. $2,300 per family in Southwest Washington. They're pocketing that money because of what we did. And it's huge. My opponent wants to undo that. She's pledged to repeal those tax cuts. She's pledged to raise taxes on single moms, on bike shops, on startup businesses by 20%. She's pledged to double federal taxes on craft brewers. And I gotta tell you, that's a part of our economy that's expanding that we all gotta love, right? This is a huge issue for us in Southwest Washington. And she has another area where we are very different. She supports a $32 trillion Medicare for All plan that would bankrupt private insurance as we know it. If you have a union plan, say goodbye to it. If you have a plan through your small business, say goodbye to it. She wants to get rid of private insurance. And more importantly, that would bankrupt Medicare for seniors who desperately rely on it. It would cost $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. And even if we doubled all federal income taxes, we wouldn't pay for my opponent's expensive plan. It's the wrong approach for the nation. It's certainly the wrong approach for Southwest Washington. And I look forward to discussing these and more issues as we move on today. Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me in the back? Thank you to the Woodland Chamber of Commerce for hosting this. This is a great event, and what an outstanding response. But I have to tell you, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because I've held 36 live town halls in the 9 months I've been in this campaign, and there are crowds like this coming to see us every single time. And that's important because that's what democracy is about, and that's what representation is all about. I'm going to do a quick bio, tell you why I'm running, and then highlight a few issues. And then maybe I'll come back and talk about where my opponent has already told multiple lies. Because you know what? In today's America, the truth matters. I grew up in a rural community on the coast. My dad owned a small business, John's Fresh Produce. He taught me the produce trade, told me it was going to come in handy. I thought he was full of beans because I was going to go to college. but you have to pay for college. And the way I got to pay for college was by starting to work at Safeway. I started as a courtesy clerk, and within a month, I was on the journeyman's track, and I was a journeyman, UFCW, local 555. That's how I paid for college, and that's why unions are so important. That's how you get family wage jobs in America. Went back east for graduate school, came back and have been teaching at Washington State University, Vancouver for 23 years. I met a woman on the line who told me that her daughter, Carolyn Long, had her life changed because of my class decades ago. She's a union organizer now, and I couldn't be prouder to get that update. I have been happy at Washington State University teaching political science, teaching public policy, and yes, teaching civility and politics. But I knew that things had to change. I knew things had to change when my research over the last 4 years showed that political polarization was at an all-time high, that we continue to elect members of Congress who are more extreme than the people they're replacing, and more important, that people are not working collaboratively to solve problems. Sure, every member of Congress is going to look at local issues, and those usually require bipartisan support. But on the major issues that impact everyone in the district, everyone in Southwest Washington, Medicare, Social Security, jobs, taxes, higher education, prescription drugs, and yes, healthcare, on those issues, you are not seeing that bipartisanship that needs to happen. Take a look at that tax bill. That wasn't a bipartisan bill, was it? No, it was a straight one-party bill, and that's a problem. And my focus on civility is not a tagline, punchline, I don't remember what it was called. I've been walking the walk for the last 4 years. In response to the incivility in my local community, I started something called the Initiative for Public Deliberation, where I bring my students whom I train into the community to show them that we all share the same values and beliefs. And that what they do is they moderate those conversations. Because I have been doing that for the last 4 years at the local level. I look forward to doing it in the U.S. halls of Congress. Now, why am I here today? I'm here today because I'm alarmed at the state of our health care. I'm alarmed at the fact that the Republicans consistently, over 36 times, voted to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Is it a perfect act? No. But has it been undermined from the start? Absolutely. So the first thing in the playbook for the Republicans was to repeal it and then to replace it. We didn't even see a replacement until a few months ago, and even then it was such a terrible replacement that they didn't move forward with it. Not only that, the Trump administration is unmantling it from the bottom up. They're not advertising it so people don't sign up. They repealed the individual mandate in that tax bill. And right now the Trump administration is not going to defend that law in court so that everybody with a pre-existing condition is at risk. That is a problem. Do you know how you protect people with pre-existing conditions? You don't undermine the ACA. But that is only one thing that we can do to stop the bleeding. We also have to focus on other ways in which we can bring health care to rural areas, which is why my plan is looking first at a public option for the rural areas. And so that is my position. I'm not sure which Democrat my opponent is running against, but I'd be happy to elaborate on that as well. Second, the high cost of prescription drugs. Prescription drugs have gone up almost 300% since the time my opponent has been in office. She's taken $56,000 from pharmaceutical companies, and guess who got a $42 billion break in that tax bill? The pharmaceutical companies. That's a problem. We need to be able to negotiate drug prices. Number three, we have to address wage stagnation. Let's be careful when we talk about the economy, because you can't just look at things like an unemployment rate and say things are going well. One of the reasons why the unemployment rate is lower is because people are working multiple jobs. Talk to me about my day with the teachers who were striking outside Howe Elementary in Vancouver. They were working multiple jobs just to stay afloat. That is the tale of most American families today, and that is a problem. So we have to look at the economy more broadly, and yes, I absolutely disagree with the tax bill, but not all of it. I don't know where these numbers are coming from. You want to know why I disagree with it? Because 83% of the benefits go to corporations and the wealthiest in America. Take a look at their wage increases. It's been tremendous. Does some part of the bill help working families? Absolutely, and I will fight to protect those. And you know what I'll also do? Make sure individual taxes that are reformed and the cuts are permanent. Corporations have a permanent tax bill or tax cut. People do not. So I do want to change it. But do you know why I really want to change it? Because it is the most fiscally irresponsible bill that I've ever seen. We are borrowing from my daughter's life. She's 13 years old. We're borrowing from her in order to fund tax cuts for the uber wealthy in America. That is not right. And not only that, we then pass a spending bill which further adds to the deficit and ultimately the debt. That is fiscal responsibility, and that is what I'm in favor of. Finally, I'm so pleased to be with you here today because this is an enormous response. But do you know what I also want? I want real debates that have real moderators, not that you're not real, that have moderators who follow strict rules and timekeepers, just like this. I think this is fantastic. But I've asked for 2 major debates. My opponent has declined. We're going to continue to ask for debates. Do you know why? Because when you debate someone, you can check their facts, you can tell the American people when they're lying, and if you want to have a little bit of idea what's happened so far, review the tape and you can find out for yourself what I stand for, but also how my record already has been misrepresented, just like the first ad my opponent aired. The first play in this game was a negative ad which misrepresented all of my positions. So I look forward to clearing some of that up today. Thank you for coming. This is a great, great opportunity to learn more about us.
We're not really interested in just hearing you clap. We want some questions from the floor. And Tommy?
Ben Thomas Jr., Woodland, Congresswoman.
Wait a minute. Directed, because she spoke last, direct the first question to Jaime.
I did.
Oh.
She is the Congresswoman.
Sorry.
How long have you been a resident of this district? And being a lovely lady, you could say all of my life, most, and not get too technical. It makes you happy.
Most of my life?
Most of your life. Ms. Long, how long have you been a resident of this congressional district?
I have been a resident for 17 months. I've taught in the community for 23 years. Let's not shy away from that. We have 2 minutes, right? So I have been, this is a nice hit against me that happened right away, that I'm new to the district. As I mentioned earlier, the woman I met on the line explained how I taught her daughter 20 years ago. I've been in this community for 23 years. And not only that, my family and I had to make the hard decision on where we lived, like most families in America, because of both of our jobs. So my situation is not unique. But I think the implication is that I don't know the district. Well, not only have I immersed myself through my work in economic development, through my work through my 3,000 students that I've taught, my work for the city and the county, but I've immersed myself in the community with my initiative for public deliberation for the last 4 years. And for that action, I received the H. Rock Award in promoting civility in political discourse. And the reason why that's important is it's a community award. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll also add that the constitutional requirement is that you're in the residence 1 day. So I think that I've done pretty well in terms of my community ties, and more importantly, I have met more voters in Southwest Washington in my 36 live town halls where you got me for 90 minutes than Jaime Herrera-Beutler has throughout her career.
Don't mess around. So I get my 2 minutes to answer, and I need to correct the facts. So I grew up in this district. This is where my folks raised us. And my husband and I are raising my 2 children here because this is home. Win, lose, or draw. These are the communities that shape my perspectives and my values and my priorities. The reason I vote the way I vote, and the reason I have disagreed with the president on key issues, or I've worked with Obama on key issues, is because of the values I learned in this district. I haven't had to hold a series of campaign rallies to get to know the hearts and the minds of the folks here. No, I actually am living here with my family, and that's something my opponent has chosen not to do. She's not raising her family in this district, and it's obvious why. She's waiting to see whether or not she wins this political election before she chooses to live among us. And that's a real issue. Last year, at this time, she was changing her Oregon plates to Washington plates. She was registering to vote in this congressional district. Now look, I'm great with people moving here. We have a ton of new folks from all over, and I think that's fabulous. But you cannot call into question my record and my presence in my communities. I've held over 80 town halls, in person, live, roundtable, telephone town hall. And you know, in the last town hall I did, In the last town hall I held, I had 5,000 people on the line, more than all of her events combined. You know what? I got thanked by a grandmother up in Morton. And she said, you know, I have too poor of health to travel, and I live in Morton. Thank you for holding this and coming into my front room for an hour. I got thanked by a mom who was trying to get dinner on the table. She got to put me in mute and listen. I had Mike, who was, she said it 30 seconds. I had Mike, who was mowing his lawn. His question came up in the question queue, stopped his lawnmower, unmuted his phone, and asked his question. I think it's absurd to say there's only one way to connect with people. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tom Samuels. I live in Longview. This is specifically geared toward you, Congresswoman. Did President Trump commit obstruction of justice on September 3rd when he lambasted the Justice Department and Attorney General Jeff Sessions when indicting Republican Congressman Duncan Hunter of California and Chris Collins, New York? You have not said anything about this, and I want to know why.
Now, just the question.
Did he commit a crime?
Is that obstruction of justice? He's interfering with the investigation, FBI investigation.
So let me ask, did the investigation cease, or is the Justice Department not going to follow through? The answer is the Justice Department is going to follow through with the investigation, and I support that. Not only do I support the Justice Department following through with that investigation, I think it's critical that the Justice Department be allowed to follow through with the other investigations with regard to the elections and the president. The president has said he committed no crimes. So in my mind, I see no reason why the Mueller investigation and others shouldn't come through to completion. And then, wherever the facts lead, I'm not afraid to go there. No one is above the law, and I am not afraid to take a stance based on what those independent investigations bring forth. But here's the thing. I can't, as a member of Congress under the Constitution, impeach or cast aspersion because I don't like someone. It doesn't work that way. I have to operate within the Constitution, and the way to keep the process fair and a way to show the American people we can trust the results is if the investigations move forward. The investigations with regard to the gentleman you mentioned are moving forward, as are the other important investigations taking place, and I'm not afraid to follow where the facts lead. Thank you.
So let me begin by telling my supporters not to clap. I got this. I don't need and obey Barbara, who's a little scary. But let me just get back to the obstruction question, if I may take a little liberty here. Facts matter, right? In America, facts matter and integrity matters. I think we've lost our way because we have a poor role model in the White House. My daughter's going to Mac High. She is an 8th grader, and she was happy after the strike was over to go to school. My husband's up in Vancouver as well. So again, I do not know who the incumbent is running against, but it certainly isn't Carolyn Long. Let me get your excellent question on impeachment. I too believe that we have to allow the investigation to continue to move forward. Robert Mueller, I think, has done an outstanding job in running a tight ship, and we can see that he's really aiming for a couple of people who really have committed wrongs. We've seen that just this week. But it's very important that the process does move forward as intended, and that we also protect the sanctity of that investigation, which is why I'm so alarmed so frequently when I hear from Donald Trump that he wants to make staff changes, because that sounds a little bit like obstruction to me. So let's let it go forward, because I believe that we will see overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing, because I think that's what it's going to take to impeach the president. And one of the things that's interesting is so often we get caught up in the impeachment issue that we're also not looking at other things that are happening in America today. So I'm hoping that doesn't act as a distraction. One of the things that I think is so good to remember when we think about impeachment is that it? 20 seconds, is that how hard it is on the country when we go through an impeachment. It's hard on the country, it's hard on our democracy, so you have to have people like me, I think, there to help mend the wounds afterwards and bring people together. Nobody wants impeachment. I'd hope the president would resign first.
Okay, that one way in the back. Oh. The lady. You.
Hi guys, my name is Tara and I'm from Vancouver, and my question for both of you guys is if you were in the position where you could make a vote to confirm the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh, how would you make that determination?
Sorry, I called you Barbara, Darlene. It's Darlene. She scares me too. If I were in the Senate, which I'm not, I would not vote to confirm Kavanaugh. And I would not because I think his position on executive power is not one that is in line with our constitutional democracy. In fact, I suspect that's one of the reasons why he was chosen. So we saw this before he was in the federal judgeship, that he very much believes the executive should have a pass in certain instances and may not be able to be indicted and prosecuted, and that's problematic to me. Which makes me want to talk a lot about what's happening to our democracy. It hasn't just happened under the Trump administration, but historically, we've seen more and more power shift from the halls of Congress to the executive branch. It happened under President Obama. It's happening quite a bit under President Trump. And I find that alarming, because I think we have to have a constitutional check on the executive branch. I've always thought this, but I believe even more so now that President Trump is in office. And you get that when we make sure that we hold the executive to account for misbehaviors. So again, that's why I would vote against Judge Kavanaugh. I also think that there were some startling allegations. I hope that it sees its day in the public eye. But let's just focus on the growth of executive authority and how problematic that is. Congress is the most democratically accountable institution of government. It's why we come and see your representatives in these town halls. You get to look us in the eye and we can tell you about our positions. They should have the most lawmaking authority. We shouldn't have lawmaking authority under executive orders or executive agreements, which we have overwhelmingly with this administration. So I would vote against him for the reasons I stated, but I also need to have a constitutional check on this president so we can take our democracy back.
So in watching, obviously I don't have a vote, I'm not running for the Senate, but in watching the confirmation hearings, I was leaning yes. I will tell you, I believe that the allegations that have come forward are serious, and I think both the accuser and the accused have deserved to have their stories heard out, which I now understand is what's going to happen next week in front of the United States Senate, and then the senators are going to make their determination based on those testimonies. So it's a little hard to get really into that right now because I'm reading the same kind of fodder that you are with regard to what people are saying, and so I'm going to be watching this next week, and ultimately the Senate's going to decide. Now, I agree with my opponent that too much power has been ceded to the executive. We did everything we could under the last administration to pull that power back, Under this administration, we're pulling back two regulations for everyone put into place. Did you know you're more likely to break a federal rule than you are a federal law? By about 400 times. So we're working, and I think that's one of the reasons you've seen the economy take off. You know, the last administration said he had his pen and his phone, and that's what he was going to use. I didn't hear my opponent screaming about executive privilege at that point. Here's the reality. We are a co-equal branch, and we have been pulling that authority back in the form of allowing you all to better regulate yourselves, not the government. And that's why we've seen 4.5% unemployment in this region. We've seen almost a 10% drop across the board. That's why wages are going up by almost 3% for the average worker. That's why the average family in Southwest Washington is keeping $2,300 more of their money in their pocket a year. My opponent wants to take that money back. And it's interesting to me, she decries the debt that projected $1 trillion healthcare or tax cut bill would cause. However, her Medicare for All plan would cost 32 times that health care bill. It would double today's federal budget. So if you're really a deficit hawk, you need to look at the whole picture. That tax bill stimulated the economy. We have more taxpayers because of it. I don't think we need to redistribute your wealth. I want you to keep it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan Taylor, and I live in East Vancouver. And my question is for both of you. I'm just wondering what Congress can do to reduce the debt and specific actions and when that will occur.
Me first? I think I'm first. So I think there's two things, and the debt is a huge issue for us. As a senior appropriator, I have worked to cut dollar for dollar out of the Appropriations Committee unnecessary and wasteful spending. We've actually cut over $1 billion. At the same time, we've reprioritized and put over $1 billion into the NIH. So some of it has to do with making tough choices and priorities. The other piece, I believe, to get the debt under control is you have to grow the economy. Under the last 8 years and under double-digit unemployment, we had no wage growth, and we had about a 2% economic growth nationwide. Today, we're at over 4%. We had more job opportunities in August, 650,000, than we actually had workers in the United States. By opening up the pie, not redividing it, and allowing more people to get a job, build their business, grow their dream, and provide opportunity for their family, they're paying more taxes. We had record revenues from that tax bill coming into the coffers this year, record revenues. And that's part of the reason I'm running for this office is I want that to continue. I want to sustain this. My opponent has pledged to repeal these tax cuts, which is a case study in how to kill a booming economy. And that's going to leave us in a world of hurt with regard to debt. I've also mentioned her Medicare for All plan. That's $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. We could double your federal income taxes, and it wouldn't pay for it. So it's ironic to talk about the tax bill costing Americans money because it's actually just letting them keep their own money, and then saying, she knows better how to spend your money, 32 times that amount. With that, I yield back.
Facts matter. Integrity matters. The fact of the matter is my positions on the tax bill and the health care bill are very clear. They have been to anybody who's come to my town halls and anybody who's heard me speak. But just remember, facts matter, integrity matters. I want to talk about the tax bill. As I said a few moments ago, there are parts of the tax bill that I think are fabulous, that help working families, and there are parts of the tax bill that help small businesses. But 83% of the tax bill helps corporate America and the high-income earners. 83%. Do I want to change that? Absolutely. But in terms of working families, the backbone of our economy, of course I want to make changes. So that's one thing that I would do. Let's talk about deficits and let's talk about the debt. In 2020, $1 trillion will be added to our debt every year that tax bill is in effect. And one of the reasons is because corporations and high-income earners are the ones who have permanent tax relief, whereas working stiffs like us only get them for a short amount of time. That needs to change. So we are being incredibly fiscally irresponsible when we are borrowing from future generations to pay for these tax cuts to people who do not need it. Let's talk about wages. It's almost as if Republicans believe that the economy kick-started just when Donald Trump got into office. That's not the case. The economic gains that we've had are a continuation of the ones that started under the Obama administration. Did we have 3.9% growth in wages? Yes, it also happened 3 times under the Obama administration. So a little history is helpful when talking about economics, and we have to remember that. But let's talk about wage stagnation. Americans have not had a real raise since 1978. Pew Research, fact check it, did a study on this, and our earning power has only increased by $2. We keep on being told that the economy is booming. Every Southwest Washingtonian I talk to who's struggling wonders who it's benefiting. It's not benefiting them.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say it's good to see Congresswoman Herrera here. I've been in the district. I'm from George Curtin from Camas. I've been in the district since 2011, lived here, and I've only seen you once. Okay, I want to ask a question about the ad you had on television. I could hear it, but it was very blurry and distorted. I didn't know Carolyn Long was in the ad until the very end because her face was kind of, distorted. But the question I have is the ad says that we cannot afford to provide health insurance for every American. Well, under Obama, we did for 20 million more Americans, but that's a different issue. Here's the question. Here's the, may I? Well, I can't, everybody's yelling at me. Thank you, I will. The question is this. After giving the 83% of the tax cut to the rich, the Republicans are now saying we cannot. I'm sorry, the question is, why can't we insure Americans and make sure they have health insurance? Thank you. That's a legitimate question, ma'am. Answer the question, please.
I think I go first. Do I go first?
Okay, the black people need to get some questions answered too. Now, my question is, we've got a lot of homeless people coming in from Portland over here. What are you guys going to do about it? They need help.
They do need help. And it's not just Portland. We have homeless problems in Washington as well. It's not as if the homeless are coming from another state to be in Washington. We have homeless in Vancouver. We have homeless in the rural counties. It is a national problem, and it's also a tricky problem. So there are many facets to homelessness. I think we have to increase people's access to affordable housing, which is why I was so pleased that Senator Cantwell was able to get the first real increase in money for affordable housing. I think we have to make sure that money stays in the Department of Agriculture to build rural housing. So those are two federal programs that I would champion and increase funding for. I think we need to do a much better job with mental health services. We don't have mental health parity in our health care program. We need to have it. We also need to have people go into mental health because there's a tremendous shortage because some of those people who are homeless need mental health assistance. We also have to look at the opioid crisis and how that's contributing to homelessness as well. And I was happy to see that we are close to getting a bipartisan bill to address some of the opioid epidemic. So we have to look at that as an issue as well. I also think we have to be very careful in how we treat people who have fallen on hard times, which is to treat them with respect, to give them the hand-up that they need, and to do everything we can both with the government, but also with our own private charities and our churches, our houses of worship, in order to help people who have fallen down on their luck. We should always remember that there are so many Americans that are a paycheck or two away from being there themselves, and we should do everything we can at the government level, but also at the private level to find them that assistance that they need. How am I done on time? 20 seconds, okay. I also think we have to look at our veteran services and do a much better job making sure that they get the services they need because an alarming number of our homeless are veterans, people who have risked their lives for us. We need to treat them with the respect that they deserve and make sure there's assistance at the local level as well.
So I agree. We have seen the homeless numbers increase in Vancouver and other areas of our region, not just in Portland, but here it's growing, which is why I was proud to champion the low-income tax credit that we passed as part of the omnibus bill earlier this year. It's a 12.5% increase, and it is the largest increase we've had. In fact, because of it, I was invited to visit Merriweather Place and be at their grand opening in Vancouver, and it's an amazing facility. They're bringing people off the streets, adults, and they're putting them in housing. And actually, they're taking services along with it. How to get a job, how to do an interview. They have substance abuse services in the facility that folks can take advantage of. It's an amazing thing. And because of the low-income tax credit, they were able to open and expand. And there are other services like that throughout Southwest Washington. You know, I think veterans services is another piece here, especially in our area. We have a great number, in fact, I think the most in the state of retired military service members or veterans. They love Southwest Washington. And so we've worked to make sure, in my office alone, we've served over 1,400 different veterans with their cases. I had one gentleman who was disabled, and he contacted the VA, and he said, I need to be able to get places to work, to do whatever I want. I can't get anywhere. He was homebound, and the VA wouldn't respond to him. I got involved, and within 30 days, he had a vehicle, and he was back able to rely on himself. And I think we need to do that to take care of the people we serve. You know, I also have worked hard to make sure that that we supported the largest mental health overhaul in a decade. It was over $6 billion worth of services, whether it was making sure people have treatment options or making sure first responders know how to, when they're encountering someone on the streets, what to do. We want to see these folks get into recovery, not get into more homelessness and more challenges. And really, quite frankly, we're seeing folks die. You look at what's happening up in Seattle. We don't want that to happen here, which is why I've stepped up in this area. And with that.
Good afternoon, ladies. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Sean Green. I'm from Longview, Kelso. My question is, how do you feel about Initiative 1631, the carbon tax? Would you vote yes or no, and why?
I would vote against it, and I have voted against similar measures already as a citizen, and I fought against them. Here's why. I believe in protecting our way of life here. I believe in stewarding our resources, which is why I've been an ardent supporter of protecting our federal forests and managing them so that they don't burn. Did you know the fires in California last year, not even all of them, but some of them, emitted more carbon into the atmosphere than all cars in California combined? If we manage our federal forests for the health of the forest and the species and for the strength of the endangered American wage earner, we're going to see our rural areas revitalized, and we're going to quit seeing this haze and this smoke that is devastating to our environment. Now, for those in our state who don't know, this is a defining issue between my opponent and I. That carbon tax, if put into place, has not demonstrated that there's going to be a scientific benefit, but it has demonstrated that it's going to kill our economy. It would add 43 cents to our gas tax currently. We pay, I think, 56 cents. We're the highest in the nation. Most of that is federal. The state, the federal piece is only 18 cents. So we've been ratcheting it up. And now, environmentalists who are extremists want to hamstring our economy and charge you another 43 cents at the pump. I haven't heard my opponent say no on this, but I will tell you unequivocally, no.
So she brought up forest fires, so this is a good opportunity to talk about climate change and how climate change is real and it's human caused. Because that apparently is something we have to say these days because, you know, facts matter, integrity matters. The reality is that no measure is going to be perfect in terms of what it offers to the people in certain communities, and 1631 is a tricky one because it is a tax on the people in the community, and it's also one that's tricky because there is support for it in many areas of our state. I haven't taken a position on it yet because we're still studying it. We want to find out how it affects Southwest Washingtonians, but I'm very much in favor of other measures to decrease our reliance on fossil fuels. We start by not taking money from them. The second thing that we do is try to pursue clean energy projects that we could bring to Southwest Washington. And we know we could do this because Washington State has done it in the Puget Sound area to great effect. So we want to incentivize clean energy projects to come into this area. We want to make sure that we look at various ways that we can address carbon. It's not just taxes, it's also burying carbon. It's dealing with the issue of climate change. This isn't a situation where one thing will fix the problem. It's also a state issue, and it's an initiative. And I think we have to have faith in the power of the people in the state of Washington and how they're going to go about in voting on this issue. But let's also look at the larger issues that are incumbent in these policy questions about clean energy. Let's see how we can preserve our clean energy projects, bring them to Southwest Washington, make sure they're union jobs so that they have family wages attached to them. And that's one way, in addition to relying on science and dealing with climate change, we can head in the right direction. Sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is David Hom, proud resident of Woodland, Washington. I'm also a proud union carpenter. My question today is, how have you and how do you plan to vote on the Family Wage Providing Davis-Bacon Act? And furthermore, how do you plan to protect us from the middle class devastating right-to-work legislation?
Thanks, David. As I said in my intro, I was a proud journeyman at Safeway. It's how I got through undergraduate relatively debt-free. I believe strongly in the power of unions. I think they've been decimated over the last several decades because of these so-called right-to-work laws. And I think it is one reason why we've seen a decline in the wages of the average American, because it corresponds with the decline of unions. I very much believe in strengthening the collective bargaining rights of American workers. I very much disagree with right-to-work laws. I very much disagree with the attempts to repeal Davis-Bacon historically by the Republicans. So I will be a union champion, not just continue playing defense, which we've had to play for years, but also playing offense. You know, I've met so many union members on the campaign trail. I've gone to their training centers. I've learned how they have these great programs which provide apprenticeships which are registered, where people can earn while they learn and come out of those training programs with family wage jobs. We should be applauding that, not demonizing unions in America. The reason for that is 2/3 of Americans don't go on to higher education. So if we have a pathway to wage success through the trades, we have to push that as much as possible. I think, David, you probably make twice the amount I do or did as a university professor. So there are great jobs. We should pursue them. I'll be a union champion for you and your brothers and sisters, and I'll be proudly doing that from day one when I get into the halls of Congress.
You're not welcome. Let me say, I support anybody's right to form a union and earn a living wage. I have taken steps, sometimes at odds with my party on this issue. But the right to work legislation is actually not as much an issue here in Washington State. We have those rights. In fact, in some areas, it's forced unionization, depending on what your industry is. So on the national level, there are other states that are right to work states. We are not one of those states. But let me tell you, I do believe strongly in making sure we're empowering employees, whether they're unionized or whether they're non-unionized. You know, I have family in the trades who are union members, and I have family in the same exact trade in an open shop. And it's interesting to hear the differences. For the most part, both of my family members, they're both hardworking, and they outwork their peers, and they get the jobs they need to get put on. But you know, I've been told about challenges that some of them have faced, and it has to do with making sure that the retirement that they have set aside is there for them. Right now, if my opponent gets into office, she has said that she will get rid of your health care retirement plan as a union worker. She has pledged to do it. She's pledged to do it. And it's not my words. She said it several times. She said it to the Longview Daily News. If Democrats are in Congress, she will support, if they're in charge of Congress next year, she will support Medicare for all. And the premise for that is getting us all off of our private plans. So it's one thing to say, I support you, I support you. It's another thing to say, I'm going to help you with your economic well-being, which means I'm going to help create an economy that has put $2,300 into the average Southwest Washington pocket. It means that if you're an entrepreneur and you want to start your own business, I have helped create a tax advantage for you so that you can start that business in your garage. My opponent wants to erase that and make you pay that money. There's a huge difference here, and I think if you really want to, all right, thank you.
Is this 20 seconds? I think you go stand right there. Yes.
Good day, ladies. My name is Chief Petty Officer Robert F. Messina, retired. I would like to have 3 definitions from you: living wage, settled science, and consensual science.
Define those terms.
I think you go first on these ones. Right? No, I went first last time. Oh, no, I go first. Okay, all right. So I was trying to offer you the go first, but so living wage to me means enough money to where you're not living in scarcity. Maybe you're not going to be rich. I don't know. I didn't grow up wealthy. My folks worked their tails off to raise us. And my dad, he was not a union member, but he worked hard, and we had enough. We didn't drive new cars. We all had to take out loans when I went to college. I had to work through college, so on and so forth. But we were able, you know, we grew up in a small farmhouse in a very rural area, but it was enough. We weren't afraid. So the dollar number can change a little bit depending on which reason in this district, but that's how I would define it. Sound science? Settled science. Well, I don't think science is static. It's dynamic. It does change. Everything we know about science, biology, physiology, physics, we know that it changes, right? But I think we can agree on, here's the irony. We can agree on basic fundamentals, but people can work numbers to fit however they want. My opponent talks about facts. Well, she's being very selective in her facts. Now, I can tell you, if you want to talk about climate change, I believe it's happening. We can argue about who started it, right? Like kids on a playground, but I think we need to address it, which is one of the reasons I'm fighting against this carbon tax, and I'm fighting to preserve our hydro system. Our dams provide 70% of the energy for this area, 70%. It would take 16 coal-fired plants to replace those. And they emit carbon. This is a carbon-free energy source. My opponent hasn't come out in support of those. And so there are numbers there. And then the other one, my downer, is the consensual science. I don't know what that means. I've never heard that term. Consensual science.
It's one of those things that is driving climate change is consensual science. It's a crop.
Just going back to the union guys and what I was told my position is, facts matter. Integrity matters. My position is well known on this, and I'm certainly not taking your health care away. Family wage, that's a great question because I do believe it differs depending on where you live in the country as well as where you live within even a congressional district. Because if you live in Seattle, the average price of your housing is going to be almost twice the amount it would be in a rural community. So it does differ. And so what I would use as a metric for what a living wage is in a particular area is the cost of housing, the cost to secure your health care, because those are two of the major things that make up our pocketbook. So I would look at that as a metric. I grew up in poverty, and I can tell you what a living wage isn't. A living wage is when you're not able to feed your family. A living wage is not when, if you are struggling to pay your health care bill. So I think that's how I don't think there's a settled definition. On hard science, what was it, the second? Not consensual, settled science. So I'm a social scientist by training. A social scientist can predict things with degrees of probability. That sounds more like consensual because it's not certain. But I think hard science is pretty damn certain. When 95% of scientists say that climate change is real and it's human cause, that seems awful settled to me. Now, do we want to pick the 1 or 2 or 3 scientists who come out in a different perspective and say, now climate change isn't happening, it's not real? I don't think that's the way you go about it. I am an academic. I know how to fudge numbers. I try not to. But you know what I am is a critical thinker and a critical writer. So as somebody who's got that critical eye, I could read an academic study and let you know if it's good science or bad science. And I think we have a problem in America with science literacy because we're able to say things like facts don't matter. 20 seconds or I'm done. Ah!
Oh, I go first. I usually announce the last question. Last one, we're going to have the last question, and this person over here has had his hand raised. That will be the last question, and it's going to put us a little over in our time.
Spencer Boudreau, Longview. I'm wondering what both candidates' positions are on Millennium Bulk Terminals, the proposed coal terminal located in Longview, Washington, that has been trying to open for the last several years, better part of a decade, actually. And if you think that the State Department of Ecology continuously levying unfair rules against them is...
Just what do you think about it?
What do you think about it, I guess? Yeah. Do you think it's obstruction of interstate commerce?
Oh gosh, you tantalized me with the interstate commerce question. I can get all academic on you. I have publicly said that I think that the report, the environmental impact report on Millennium is troubling, and I'm glad that we are being very thorough in examining aspects of that project and how it might be environmentally unsafe. It is a state issue. It is not something where the federal government plays a role. I would like to see cleaner energy projects in our industrial counties. It's why I think that the NWIW's methanol plant is a little bit more interesting. Not only has it been permitted, but it is one that is running on transitional fuel and is creating something in transition, and I think we need to slowly transition ourselves off of fossil fuels. But in terms of a federal role, I don't see that I have one. I know that They've had quite a time with the permitting process in terms of it taking a long time. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We live in one of the most beautiful areas of Washington State. And if there's concerns about the environmental impact of a project, we got to make sure that those concerns are addressed in a way that is based on science and is based on a process that we respect in the end. So that would be my answer on Millennium.
And to the labor folks who just heard that answer, who are asking me about whether I support right to work in other states, because we already, here right now, you have the right to unionize. This is exactly one of the differences between my opponent and I. That plant has the potential to give us 300 permanent jobs and 2,600 construction jobs. And it has been jumping through hoops for 6 years. The local county supports it, local labor supports it. Everybody who lives in this region, in terms of leadership, has I shouldn't say everybody, I will qualify. A lot of the county leadership has stepped up to fight State Department of Ecology because they recognize that this plant wants to be a good neighbor. Now that's my criteria. If they want to be a good neighbor and they want to abide by our environmental rules and they're going to protect us and they want to be a part of our community, then we shouldn't shut those jobs down. These hard-hit rural areas have been so because radical environmentalists allow these types of plants to operate elsewhere in the state, but not here, where we need the work and we need the jobs. And if they can jump through the hurdles and prove they'll meet the environmental impacts, then we should say open here. Now, another thing I think is important. So my opponent has talked about how I'm changing her record. I have so many quotes, I can't even read them all, where she has said repeatedly that she'll support Medicare for all. She said it in June. She said it in April. She said that she's going to support tax increases. She said she would support all of them. But today I'm hearing equivocation. Well, not on the working class. Well, I didn't really mean that. I think facts do matter. And I look forward to the rest of this campaign where the facts are going to speak for themselves. Thank you.